Life of a Submariner. Now, who better than to have speak on the subject than Commodore Anil J. Singh, having served the submarine arm for over 3 decades and had the rare privilege of commanding 4 submarines and a fleet ship. An alumnus of the National Defence Academy and the Defence Services Staff College, he has also been the Chief Instructor Navy at the NDA and Senior Directing Staff at the Naval War College. He has served as Indian Defence and Naval Advisor at the Indian High Commission at London, UK, and presently is serving as Vice President, Indian Maritime Foundation, among the many other hats that he is donning today. So with this, I welcome Commodore AJ Singh. Welcome, Commodore AJ Singh, and the aspirants will be certainly delighted to have you talk to them. Jai Hind and welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give my views on the Navy and the submarines. You know, the Navy as a service is somewhat different from our perception of what is different from the Army and the Air Force to some extent. Firstly, because it operates away from the eyes of most people. The Navy operates over the sea. So one doesn't see it on a regular basis. One sees aircraft flying in the air. One sees Army vehicles moving, Army troops moving. But one never sees a naval ship sailing or a submarine underwater. So from that perspective, not very much is known about the Navy. So I think it's important that young people understand, particularly in North India, who haven't had an exposure to the sea, get a better understanding of what the Navy is about and what the Navy does. So the Indian Navy is the 4th largest Navy in the world. It is considered one of the most powerful navies. It is considered a professional Navy is not only the fact that it is able to do whatever it has to do to defend India's territorial integrity, but it is one measure is to see how much do the other world navies respect your Navy for its professionalism. And I'm happy to tell you that more than 40 navies in the world, including all the leading navies, whether it's the US, the British, the French, the Japanese, the Australian, the Canadian, exercise with the Indian Navy. So the Indian Navy does bilateral and multilateral exercises with over 40 other world navies in our waters, which means that they want to come and exercise with us more often than we may want to go and exercise with them. So this, I think, is a good measure of understanding what a good reputation the Indian Navy has in the world. Insofar as the submarines go, now, while you still see a ship, you will very rarely see a submarine because the submarine is underwater. And the submarine arm is a very specialized arm. Submarines as such are very specialized vessels. They're quite different from ships. And therefore, one has to undergo special training to become a submariner. First thing, the most important thing is that joining the submarine arm is entirely voluntary. Nobody can be forced to join it because it requires a little more, more higher level of physical fitness, a deeper level of commitment. So you cannot force anyone to become a submariner. But notwithstanding the fact that it is a voluntary arm, we generally get more volunteers every year than we have vacancies. Therefore, very often we have to even sometimes refuse people who are keen to join the submarine arm, saying we can only take so many people this year into the arm. So you may try another year next year. So that is a feature of the submarine arm. And at any time, if one wants to leave the submarine arm, one is allowed to leave the submarine arm and go back into the normal Navy. But to give you an indication, in my 30 years in the submarine arm, I only know of 2 officers who left. And they left not because they were unhappy with the arm, but because they were very claustrophobic. So they found that they were finding it very difficult to operate for many, many days underwater in a closed steel cylinder. They were feeling suffocated. And then I think it was important that they leave because there was no point trying to be unhappy in an environment in which you are supposed to operate for the rest of your life. But otherwise, once a person joins the submarine arm, he does not generally leave it. He stays there right till the end, till he retires. And that, I think, speaks very highly of the quality of submariners who join and the kind of professional satisfaction this very tough environment gives, which means that people are so happy professionally, they feel they're doing something meaningful that they don't leave. Now, coming to how do you join the arm? Well, after you join the Navy, which is through the NDA or directly through Naval Academy, or after university entry scheme, we have a university entry scheme where you can do your graduation and then join as in the engineering and electrical branches of the Navy. Once you've joined the Navy, that is a choice you have to make before you enter a training academy. Then on getting commissioned, as now it's a lieutenant, every naval officer has to undergo 1 year's courses. You go to every naval training establishment and learn something about what happens there. For example, you will go into 5 weeks in the gunnery school to understand how does naval guns work, how do naval missiles work, what is the concept of operation, how are they used in war. Then you will go to the communication school. There they will teach you how naval communications are used. So similarly, you go to every school that the Navy has, every training establishment for short capsule courses of 4 to 8 weeks to understand, so that by the end of it, when an officer is posted to a ship, he has a fairly good understanding of what is happening on board. He understands what the communicator is doing. He understands what the navigator is doing. He understands what the engineer is doing. He understands what the electrical officer is doing. So that is very important. And that is why this 1 year courses are done. Once you finish these courses after 1 year, then you can volunteer for any of the arms. You can volunteer for the submarine arm. You can volunteer for the aviation arm and become a naval pilot or an observer, or you can become a diver, a deep sea diver, which is also very tough, which are, you've heard of something called the Marine Commandos, Marcos. They are the ones who become the Marine Commandos subsequently with further training. But all these three arms are voluntary. If you choose not to do join any of these three, you just go into the normal Navy and become a normal surface warfare officer on a surface ship, which is an equally important job to do. Then you get posted from one ship to another ship. So submarine arm, aviation arm, and the diving branch are voluntary arms. Coming back to submarines. Once you've joined the submarines, once you volunteered for it and you've undergone the medical. Now the medical is a little more strict because first thing you have to be seen whether you can withstand pressure. Because in a submarine, under normal circumstances, while it is like an aircraft. When you are sitting in normal and there's no problem, then it feels like normal air. It's pressurized. However, if there is an emergency, if there is a problem and the submarine loses pressure, then the outside pressure of the water will start acting on the submarine and the people inside. So you have to be able to withstand that pressure. So one has to go through a pressure chamber in the naval hospital, and various tests are done over there. Then there are some psychological tests to be done also, basically to see whether you have the mental ability to sort of sustain yourself in that environment. And once you've cleared, and these are not difficult. These are just, they want to see that you're not unfit for it. It doesn't mean that you're weaker than anybody else, or you're not up to the mark, or you're not fit. Some people are claustrophobic, they're claustrophobic. Some people are not happy in that environment, they're not happy in that environment. It's not a disqualification of any kind that you are not up to the mark. It is just that you should be suited for that environment, basically. Once you've joined the submarine arm, or you volunteered and you've been selected for it, one has to go for a 6-7 month course to INS Satwana. INS Satwana is a naval establishment in Visakhapatnam on the east coast of India, which is the submarine warfare school, where submarine training is imparted to those who volunteer for the arm, and subsequently when people go for courses also, they go to Satwana. In Satwana, in these 7 months, besides learning the theoretical parts of a submarine, everything that's the theory of a submarine, the systems, etc., you also have to undergo something called an escape training course, which is of 4 weeks duration, 1 month. Now, this is another tough course because they teach you how to escape from a submarine that may have sunk underwater. So you have to operate under conditions of, it could be dark, you could be injured, many things could have happened, and you are under pressure. Now, if you're at 100, let's say your submarine has sunk at 100 meters depth. That means the moment you leave the submarine, even if it is pressurized, you will be subjected to 10 kg per centimeter square pressure. If it is deeper, that much more. So you have to learn to escape from that. So there are various drills and there are various procedures. It is not that these are difficult or they're impossible. It's just that they make you practice these so much that they become natural to you. Because when you're trying to escape from a submarine that is sunk, there is no time to start thinking, what did they teach me? What should I do now? It should come naturally to you that I'm supposed to do this. Everybody on board the submarine has an escape suit. He wears an escape suit and then he carries out the escape drill. So it is very important to clear the escape training course. If you cannot clear the escape training course, then you cannot become a submariner. That's sort of the bottom line. Once you finish these 7 months in INS Satwana, then every officer who has done the course, or sailor also for that matter, is posted to a submarine for further training. So you go 3 or 4, the course is divided amongst as many submarines as there are operational submarines there are. And let's say there are 5 operational submarines with 20 officers. They'll send 4 to each submarine for training. This 7 months, again, you'll spend 6 to 7 months there. And it's pretty intensive training. You go and join every department on board. The officers, specialized officers are there to take you through the paces, to teach you things, to help you understand the practical aspects of submarining. You're given an opportunity to operate equipment under supervision. So basically, you are now being taught the practical aspects of submarining. Once you finish these 6 months on board, then you have to undergo a board of officers, which includes about 4 or 5 senior submarine officers, will ask you various questions on submarining. What have you learned? They'll give you situations that suppose so and so thing happens, what will you do? Suppose so and so thing happens, what will you do? It's an interview basically, but very submarine oriented to understand that you're not expected to be a genius. You're not expected to be able to answer everything 100%. The intention there is to find out, have you understood enough? Have you understood the fundamental concept of submarine operations to be able to continue in the submarines thereafter? So that is what happens. At the end of this 1 year, you are now qualified to call yourself a submariner. and you get the submarine badge. Now, it's like a flying badge. Like a pilot does his training and wears wings, a submariner wears dolphins. I don't have the dolphins here, but I'll get them next time. So that is a badge we're all very proud of wearing, because that means that you have passed through this 1 year successfully and you have qualified to be a submariner. Now you're a full-fledged submariner, but still there is a certain amount of training you still have to do, which means that now you have to be trained. Now that you have understood how a submarine works in theory and in practice, now you have to be able to operate that submarine independently when you're on watch. That means you don't need to be supervised by anybody underwater. So for that you need to undergo something called dived watchkeeping. It's called a dived watchkeeping certificate, which means that after you get the dived watchkeeping certificate, you can do a watch. What we call a watch means an officer on duty underwater, when the submarine is underwater. So this takes another 6 to 7 months. Again, you are given supervision and you're given independent time to learn on your own. You are expected to start doing things on your own. Once all that is over, then at the end of that 6 months, again there's a board, and you're given months to become now a full-fledged submariner who can do anything he's expected to do on a submarine, he or she. And there's no ladies at the moment, so at the moment it's only he. He is expected to do on a submarine. So now that you've become a full-fledged submariner, now you will be transferred to various submarines for, you'll be a assistant navigating officer, or an assistant weapon officer, or an assistant sonar officer. So depending on whatever job there is, a young officer is posted to, could be one submarine, could be one after another, 2 or 3 submarines, till the officer goes for his specialization. Now, specialization in the Navy, there are 4 specializations. There is communication, navigation, gunnery, and anti-submarine warfare. Submariners go for all 4. In the good old days, we never went for gunnery because there was no gun on board. But now that submarines can also fire missiles, submariners also go for the gunnery course. This course is 1 year. You do it along with your counterparts from the surface Navy, who also come for these courses. And you're on par with everybody else. You do exactly what they're doing. It's not separate. It's not different. It's not postmate who has come from the surface Navy will do. At the end of this 1 year, then you go back to submarines as a specialized officer. Then you will be the navigating officer if you're specialized in navigation. You will be the torpedo officer if you're specialized in anti-submarine warfare. You'll be the communication officer if you're specialized in communication. That means for that particular department on board, you are solely responsible to the captain of the submarine. And to ensure that in any eventuality, you know exactly what you're supposed to do. You're able to take charge of that department and do it to the best of your ability. So these, we call them specialist tenures because you've specialized in come. So this could be another 2 or 3 years you're doing this on various submarines. After which, then the next step that in the submarine you do is something called a PCO course, a Principal Control Officer, which means that now you're in a position, you've done your specialization, you've seen how the other specializations work. Now you take over as an executive officer of a submarine. An executive officer means the second in command. That means in a control room of the submarine, and if the captain is not present, the commanding officer, you should be able to command the submarine. You should be good enough to be able to take all the decisions that a commanding officer would have taken had he been present. He may be in his cabin. He can't be there 24 hours, 7 days of the week. So he may be in his cabin, but he is confident in his cabin because he knows he's got an XO who can take these decisions on his behalf. So once you do this Principal Control Officer's course, which is not a very difficult course, but it's a very professional course, then you get transferred to a submarine as a second in command, as the executive officer. Second in command in the Navy is called an executive officer. One is an executive officer for 1 or 2 years, till one then gets selected to do what we call the Submarine Commanding Officers Qualifying Course, COQC, Commanding Officers Qualifying Course. This is perhaps one of the toughest professional courses in the Navy. And in a very colloquial sense, in many navies, they call this the perisher course because they say so many people fail that many people perish in this course. So it's called a perisher course. So this is probably one of the toughest courses. There are no second chances. If you fail it once, you will not be called back again because then it is felt you're not fit enough to take over as commanding officer of a submarine. And you can imagine how tough it is because here is everybody who comes to this course has spent 10 to 12 years on a submarine before that. He's been an XO, he's been a specialist officer, he's been a watchkeeping officer. And despite that, if he fails, it means that obviously he was not good enough to become the captain of a submarine. So only those who qualify the submarine COQC thereafter are made commanding officers of submarines. If by some chance you don't qualify the PCO's course or you don't qualify the COQC course, it is not considered normal surface Navy and continue with your career the way you would have otherwise. It's just that your further service, you will not be able to serve in submarines thereafter because if you're not qualified commanding officer's course, once your people have become commanding officers, there's no job for you really on board. So that is as far as from 12 to 18 months to as long as the Navy thinks you should be in command. Like I commanded 4 submarines. So I was actually in command for 5.5 years of a submarine. So that depends. That depends on the circumstances.
Definitely, I think
And
that's
the
a very
requirement.
rare privilege, perhaps, to command so many submarines, 4 submarines. So, of course, so can you share with us any experiences, that you would like to share? Maybe challenging ones and the good ones.
I was only 22 years old when I qualified for submarines, and the first posting I got was to a submarine called INS which was at that time supposed to go to Russia for the repairs. In those days, 30 years ago, we didn't have repair facilities for submarines in India. So for long major repairs, we used to have to go to Russia. The good old Soviet Union. We used to go to a place called Vladivostok, which is on the east coast of Russia. So we sailed from India in December, in the middle of winter, heading to Russia. When we entered, about 5 days before we were to enter, or 6 days before we were to reach, while we were at sea, we saw the sea actually freezing. That was the first time in my life that I had seen a frozen sea, where suddenly you found that there were these huge ice blocks floating around. Like people saw in the Titanic and icebergs reduced because suddenly there was this huge mass of frozen sea. It wasn't that there were pieces of sea that were frozen. Uh, so it is all these. This was a great experience. When we entered Vladivostok Harbour on 23rd January 1983, the temperature that day over there was minus 36 degrees. And we were on an open bridge on a submarine coming in from the sea. So this was a unique experience for me. So at various times you've had various experiences. Sometimes when you go on long patrols, you've spent 45 days underwater. That is a unique experience. The first time continuously without seeing daylight, without seeing anything in the steel cylinder. There have been times when you had a close shave. There has been machinery failure at a very critical time. The submarine is losing depth. You're not being able to react. You're not being able to pull it out. And if a submarine were to goes down at speed, it'll go down so fast and hit the bottom that's the end. I mean, you won't come out of it. So there have been experiences, but good training, I think, is what pulls you out of experiences, pulls you out of emergencies. And it's not the most important thing in a submarine, which any submariner must understand, is that it is not a one-man show. Each and every person on board is responsible for something, and any person making a mistake can take the whole submarine down. So it is not the commanding officer made a mistake, so the submarine sank. It could be a junior-most sailor who was supposed to open some valve, but did not open it properly or did not shut it properly, and so the submarine got flooded. Submariner has to be very conscious of it all times. That I may be the junior-most, but what I am doing is also very critical for the safety of the submarine. And if one knows his job well, if one follows the proper safety precautions that are laid down, then a submarine is not dangerous. And that is what we emphasize to people right from the beginning, that a submarine is safe, but till you forget that it can be dangerous. If you start forgetting that, then you will make mistakes, and then the submarine becomes a dangerous platform. So that is something one must keep in mind.
All right. So, how about the culture within the submarine? How you stay. You would be having close to about maybe 30 to 50 crew of a submarine, right? So, how do you spend time? What is, of course, and there must be a lot of operational activities going on. Yet, the 24/7, what really happens? How do you stay? And of course, it must be confined spaces.
Yeah, the submarine is a difficult environment. Of course, like I said, we spent 45 days underwater. You're in a steel cylinder. You're 50 or 60 people there, living in very close proximity to. There are only limited number of sleeping spaces in a submarine. So very often, when one sailor vacates a bunk and goes on duty, the chap who comes, not that you have a bunk to yourself, you say at least, okay, this is my personal space. So in a submarine, nobody has any personal space. Everybody is in that environment. But there is a very strong sense of bonding in a submarine. None of us, when we are in our submarines, unlike you'll see in the Air Force or the Army or even on ships, wears any rank on our shoulders when we are inside. We wear the same clothes. We do everything exactly identical. We eat the same junior sailor. Forms a very. And when you're spending 45 days with 60 people, you come to know them very well. So even as a commanding officer, even my junior-most sailor, I will know where he belongs to, which place he belongs to, what is his family like, does he have any problems, how old are his children, what are his parents, does he have problems at home, what do his parents do, things like that. So it's what I'm trying to say, that it's a very close family. And that is what very sort of exacting environment. There is no entertainment on board. You have no communication with the outside world. So there is no internet, there is no Wi-Fi, there is no Netflix, there is nothing. You do carry a few. In the good old days, we used to carry DVDs and all. But how many DVDs can you carry? So we used to say movie we'd see 10 times over and still enjoy it. So this was the enjoyable part of submarining. That you're so sort of enjoying each. If after 45 days in such close proximity, people can start getting fed up of each other also. But in the submarine, we never found that happening. We found everyone was sort of cheerful. Everyone was helping the other guy. If your effort to relieve his tension, called him, joke with him, maybe had a Coke with him or something like that. So that is the sort of teamwork inside, which keeps us going in a difficult environment, which is submarine. And sometimes the submarine has to be very silent, so you cannot afford to have any noise coming outside the submarine, which can be picked up by the enemy. So we even switch off air conditioning. Temperatures inside can go up to 50, and we'll see what to do. So, it's that sort of a thing. So it's a very special environment. And I think it is the very close bonding amongst submariners, which makes it not only bearable, but we all sort of enjoyed. Like I said, nobody who volunteers for the submarine arm that I have seen has ever left the arm because he did not like the environment on board. He may have had other health problems or whatever, that's a different matter. But never left because he didn't like a submarine or didn't like being on a submarine or didn't like the people on the submarine. We all enjoyed it. And we continue to maintain those friendships and bonds even today, many, many years after we have left the Navy.
I'm sure, of course, I think that that's the hallmark of, in general, the services. You have a very strong bonding, and certain arms and certain, you can say, units in the different services, they have very, very strong bonding because of perhaps the very close-knit requirement of staying together. So, if you can just share with us something which you, your most difficult, one of the most difficult experiences, that almost challenging experience you may have had in the submarines.
Serving the Air Force for over 31 years was full of dynamic challenges and required single-minded determination. I am Group Captain Rajesh Pandey, and I'll guide you live on Unacedamy to give flight to your dreams. Download the Unacedamy learning app and attend my free live classes.
Now that I look back, I had two very, very narrow shapes, which I can describe now. Many years have passed. We were leaving Visakhapatnam harbour. Now, when a submarine leaves harbour, it stays on the surface to go out of the harbour. But once we are in sufficient water where we can dive, the submarine dives. Because the most important thing for a submarine is that it should not be detected by anybody. Nobody should know where the submarine is. That is the whole purpose of having a submarine, that the enemy must never come to know where you are. So if you continue on surface for some more time, the enemy can find out, oh, this person is heading in this direction generally. So the moment we get an opportunity, we dive and just disappear from the surface, so to speak. So here we were, and we decided to dive to 30 meters. This was about 3 hours after leaving the harbour, after leaving Visakhapatnam harbour. This I'm talking of 1997, when I was commanding a submarine called INS Satwana. And I was sailing that time. I had taken some training officers on board. These were the officers who had been selected for the Perisher course, the submarine commanding officer qualifying course. So they were all very experienced submariners. So we have this. So you give them enough opportunity to sort of keep track. So here was this officer on the periscope, because when you're on surface, you're looking through a periscope before you dive. So he said the submarine is not going down. Now, I could not understand why the submarine is not going down. When I say going down means it was not diving. That means we had created the angle to dive the submarine like that. The submarine dives at an angle. But sometimes what happens is the water conditions are such. The water conditions change. By the way, that is something you must understand. That the nature of the surface and the dive and the depths of water can be quite different from each other. It depends on salinity, it depends on temperature, and it depends on pressure. There are three factors which determine how the hydrology will be in that particular area. And we in submarines have to be very careful when we calculate all this, because our whole survival can depend on it, to understand the hydrology at that particular time. Every time a submarine leaves harbour, enters harbour, it checks what the hydrology is, so that it understands why the submarine is behaving in a particular manner when it is behaving in a particular manner. And how much is the hydrology having an effect on the submarine's maneuverability, on the submarine's ability to dive, etc. So here he kept saying the submarine is not diving. Now, I had just entered harbour 2 days before that. Mm-hmm. So I thought to myself that obviously the nature of the surface could not have changed so much in 2 days that now, I came in perfectly well, and now when I'm going out, the submarine is not diving. And he kept saying submarine is not diving. So I looked at the depth gauge. We have a depth gauge which shows how much depth the submarine is going to, from 0 to 300 meters or 400 meters, whatever be the depth that submarine is designed for. So as you keep diving, the needle keeps moving up. And we also have an electronic depth gauge. So we have two, a manual depth gauge and an electronic, so that, if one fails, the other one is still available. So I looked at both, and both were showing that the boat is not diving. So I sort of thought to myself, what could be wrong? And I said, okay, we call it venting the depth gauge. That means you open the depth gauge, if there's an airlock in it, it goes away, and then you shut it again, and so the water flows freely inside and operates on the pressure sensor. The moment we vented the depth gauge, suddenly the needle shot up like that and went straight to 40 meters, 45 meters, in 50 meters of water. So we were on the verge of actually hitting the bottom at 10 knots speed. 10 knots is about 20 kilometers per hour. We were going to hit the bottom of the sea. And it was just coincidence, or maybe sixth sense or whatever, that made me check this. Otherwise, it would have been disaster. But we were able to, again, like I said, it's all about training. I, as the commanding officer, gave the orders, now started giving orders to salvage that position. Salvage that, that this emergency that we were facing, by giving whatever we have, a series of orders we give. But it was a good training of my crew that was able to respond to these orders immediately. Otherwise, I could have given an order, but if the person on the other side is not trained well enough, he may not be able to execute it. If I say, okay, pump out so-and-so thing, if he's not able to operate the pump fast enough, or he doesn't operate the correct pump, or he doesn't operate to the extent I want him to do it, it can be a problem. So this was actually later on, when we sort of saw where we were, we discovered that we were actually only 2 feet from hitting the bottom of the sea before we pulled out. So that was, I think, the most risky experience I've had. And it was all again due to human error. This officer did not realize that there could be some other reason why the depth gauge is not working. He kept saying it's not going down, it's not going down. Not realizing that if a boat is not going down, there could be many reasons why it's not going down, and not just the hydrology. But this was something that we learned a lot of lessons from. So every experience that you have to learn something from it. That okay, we made a mistake. We must not do it, and this mistake never gets repeated. So this was one experience. A second experience was, we were on a mission very close to the coast. Sometimes submarines go on intelligence missions close to the coast. We were on this mission close to the coast. It's called a mine laying mission. Submarines are expected to lay mines in wartime. We carry mines very close to enemy harbors because a submarine can quietly go dive, lay a mine and disappear from there. A ship can be seen. But when you have to be very careful of. Now, he cannot see you because you're dived or you're at periscope depth. So you're just below the surface. But you have to be careful that you don't hit him, or you have to be careful that you don't let him hit you. He may be coming at you. You have to move out and deviate from your course too much. So it is a combination of factors. So very often what happens is you get caught up into the act of that mine laying exercise that sometimes you tend to neglect what's happening around you. And suddenly there was this one time we were doing it. One of my officers was doing a mining exercise. I was sitting on the captain's chair, and suddenly I said to him, let me look through the periscope once. And I was horrified. The moment I turned the periscope, I saw this huge ship coming absolutely directly at me. He hadn't seen me because my little periscope was only about half a meter above the water. But he was this huge guy. And it was a series of 2 or 3 orders that I gave. Again, good training, immediately obeyed by my crew exactly the way I wanted him to. And I think we missed that ship by, I don't know, it's difficult to say how much he missed that ship by. But it was, I wouldn't even known he's hit a submarine, it would have been like that. So these are experiences you get. But from that we learned. We learned that, okay, when we are operating in shallow waters, so close to, the enemy shore, there will be shipping, there will be. So everything was a learning experience. So these are just 2 instances. We've had, every submarine commanding officer in the course of his 30 years or 25 years in submarine has had experiences of one kind or another. But let me also tell you that the Indian Navy is one of the only submarine operating navies in the world which has never lost a submarine. The Chinese have lost, the Russians have lost, the Japanese have lost, French have lost, Brits have lost, everybody lost submarines. See, because an accident can happen. We, touch wood, have a 100% safety record of accidents at sea. So it is not as dangerous as one think it is.
All right. So coming back to the youngsters of today, of course everyone aspires to join the armed forces, but they're generally not used to the kind of restrictions that go with the services, and they have got so used to staying in their own my world and with all the gadgets and all. So how much time do you think it takes to get them into the groove? You would have trained a number of officers, or youngsters getting into let's say the submarines. So like in the surface ships, you have the luxury of having some communication outside, correct? And here you said in submarines, you just do not have this. So all those things that they've been used to all through their lives, how do they overcome that? And how much time normally it takes? Is it really very difficult, or they adapt to it?
See, I've been lucky that I've also been a chief instructor Navy at the National Defence Academy. So I've had occasion to train young boys like your aspirants joining the NDA and putting them through the paces. And it is always very gratifying to see how quickly a young boy who's coming from an environment where he has no exposure to military life at all, nobody in his family has been in the military ever, is also able to adapt to this environment and this life of discipline and sort of orderly sort of existence. So once you finish your 4 years here in your training and come into the Navy, Army, or the Air Force, I think a certain amount of conditioned individual who is able to think. Discipline is not about discipline, and this is something aspirants will understand. Discipline is not about marching or or whatever drill and things like that. It is about instilling a thought process, a sort of psychological thing in you, which makes you start thinking. Many of us in the services, given a situation, will react exactly the same way, in certain areas, or our reactions are pretty similar. And so that is because we are so well conditioned. And this, I think, is very important in the armed forces, where you have to react at an instant's notice. You don't have time to think. You don't have time to plan. You're not going to call a meeting. There is a split-second decision that has to be taken. To take the right decision, the mind has to be conditioned adequately and similarly. So I think very fact that our training right from the beginning is so good that by the time a person comes into a specialized thing like the submarine arm or becomes a fighter jet pilot or something like that, he is able to think instinctively. It comes to him naturally. And further good training, which is what I say, it is all about training. So even in a submarine, when we are sailing, let's say in peacetime we are sailing, it's not war. We are out for 20 days or 25 days. You are exercising with fleet ships, you're doing exercises, you're doing all kinds of things. You will find in a submarine, the commanding officer is saying, okay, let us practice some more drills and emergencies. Let us practice attacks. Let us practice something. Let us keep the crew, keep honing this, keep making it do the same thing over and over again so that it becomes second nature to them. And I think that is important. And that is why what you're saying is about understanding the environment and adapting to it. We have, right from our initial training, I think we are conditioned to be able to adapt to an environment. If the environment is more exacting, I mean, for example, let me draw an example. A submarine is still a voluntary arm. You may want to join, you may not want to join. But nobody is asking you to volunteer for Siachen Glacier.
Absolutely.
You are sent there.
Absolutely.
And you adapt. You adapt to that. It's not that you run away from there. You adapt and you do a great job there. So that sort of, I think, conditioning that we all undergo during our training prepares us for this sort of being able to adapt to an environment, however challenging it might be.
No, I know. Of course, we do.
As far as
when we
just to add, as far as the submarine arm, goes, we do a lot of mentoring on board. You know, we sit with the boys, we sit and talk to them. We explain to them why we are doing what we are doing. We explain to them the sort of the imperatives that are important for submarines to operate. We are very sort of empathetic to their personal requirements. If there's a sailor who has a problem, family problem or something, we will go out of our way to help him solve it. We will try and, so that he should also feel that if he's giving something to the arm is also taking care of him. The arm is also looking after him. His commanding officer is looking after him. In the Navy, a commanding officer is like a god to his sailors.
Absolutely.
It is in the other services, but in the Navy, because you're in a closed environment, he's like a god. Now, if the sailor feels that, you know, I'm telling my commanding officer I have a problem, he's not even responding, it can cause problems. So it is that sort of a bond which is there, and that sort of two-way traffic which makes people survive these sort of environments and enjoy them and deliver the goods when the time comes.
No, I'm sure it must be, because see, as far as the officer cadre is concerned, so we very in fact particular when we are checking those OLQs. You know, adaptability being one of the key qualities that we look for. You know, and the guys who we find that they do not have the willingness to change, right, to adapt to new environments, perhaps they don't make the grade. And thereafter, of course, like you said, no, it's all the training and the mentoring that perhaps helps them to adapt to a new condition. Yeah, so we have by and large, you know, covered a lot of the doubts that the aspirants have, and I've been interacting them. I've indicated to them that yes, we're going to have a veteran submariner talking to them, or rather at least speaking about the experiences. So most of the things have been covered. A new this thing which is cropping up is, okay, if women can join the fighter stream, when is it that, you know, you'll find the women into the submarine arm? So your take,
that's an interesting question. No, that's an interesting question, because, you know, I personally feel that women in no way are inferior to men when it comes to, I mean, they're not expected to go into a hand-to-hand combat in a submarine with an enemy.
Yeah.
So it's not that they're mentally inferior or physically inferior or anyway. They're as good, if not better. And the Navy has, I mean, our women officers in the Navy have proved it over the years that they're as good as the men. The submarine has a very strange working environment. In fact, not only the Indian Navy, but there are, of course, there are some navies which have women on board. The British Royal Navy has, the Royal Australian Navy has, the Dutch Navy has, the German Navy has. But they also took a long time before they took this conscious decision that will they allow women on board submarines or not. One of the reasons they were forced to do it is because, you know, there is fundamentally a shortage of manpower in these countries. They don't have large populations. So if you had to man your crews, you needed women. Notwithstanding that, in fact, the German Navy is one of the first navies where there's a woman commanding officer of a submarine. There's a lady commanding officer now. So they're obviously as good as the men. The submarine being a very cramped environment, and, you know, our social sort of structures being the way they are, it would take time before we'll be able to create an environment on board which is sort of compatible for women officers or sailors to be comfortable in. Just to quote a small example. In a submarine where there are 60 people in a crew, there are only 2 toilets, just 2.
Absolutely.
For 60 people. So people actually stand in a queue waiting to go to the toilet in the morning. Now, it will be a very odd situation if after 2 men, there's a lady standing in the queue and then another 2 men behind that. You know, it's not that it can't be done. It will just take a lot of getting used to. So I think these things will happen. These bastions will break down, but I think we should not rush into them. We should understand all that, and then bring it in a very sort of calibrated, measured way. Check, see what all improvements can be done. For example, now we are going to get lady officers on board warships, let's say. So the new warships that are coming are being designed in such a way that there would be accommodation that can be reserved for lady officers, where the toilets may be different, the cabins may be in a different alleyway. They don't have to, these more personal things they don't have to share with the men. Now this is very different from the culture that prevails in the West. I mean, I'll give you a small example. In India, when you are frisked at the airport, a lady is frisked in a closed cubicle by another lady.
Yes.
But when you go to Europe, a lady could be frisking you, a man could be frisking the lady passenger in full view of everybody. So these are the sort of social differences that exist in India. There are these social issues which exist in India, and they will take some time to get used to it. But mark my words, 10 years down the line, I won't be surprised, and I'll be quite happy to see a lady officer on board a submarine.
Then I'm sure it will be. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of time.
It's a matter of time.
We have seen, we have seen the induction of lady officers in the services, in our service careers. And initially, the kind of teething problems were there. We are well aware of them. Like you said, separate toilets, separate rooms, not sharing the rooms. And you as male officers, you share the rooms in the messes and other places. Deployment in the field, in the tents. So, there have been challenges, and which over a period of time they have been overcome. And I'm sure even this is going to come, like you said, all these bastions are going to be broken someday or the other. So that is explains, and hopefully, I do not know how far back it was when you were in NDA, but the same question, NDA, when do we see the women cadets getting into? I mean, there must be some thought process, I'm sure.
I think there already is. If I remember correctly, I think last year the defense minister did make a statement that we will start inducting women into the NDA also. And I suppose if they can go to the OTA, I see no reason why they can't come into the NDA.
No, I know.
Again, they will have to be, you and I are familiar with NDA, the squadrons may have to be restructured a little bit, in terms of giving privacy to women cadets and things like that. Because, I think we are not at that stage like Europe is, where toilets can be shared, everyone's bathing in front of everybody. We haven't reached that level socially. Yes. I'm sure the girls would be uncomfortable. Their parents would be extremely uncomfortable. So all those things will have to be addressed before we can go down that route, I think. But yes, it is inevitable. It will happen very soon, and I see no reason why it should not happen.
No, I'm sure it is going to happen, because now even the Scenic schools have started inducting girl cadets.
That's right.
I think there are 2-3 Scenic schools which have already inducted girl cadets, and so it's inevitable, I think. Okay, so Commodore Jai Singh, I think it's been fantastic speaking to you. At some other time, we will also talk about the maritime aspects of the Navy, as far as the power projection is concerned, the blue water component of the blue water. What do you call it? Blue water Navy. As
blue water capability of the Navy. Yeah.
India is aspiring to be, right. I am sure it is going to happen if it is not already there. So we will do that. And with that, I thank you very much